Hi, I'm Bill Morse. I'm a cartoonist and illustrator, and you're listening to GuildCast.
GuildCast is a weekly podcast series based on the 3 pillars of the Graphic Artists Guild: advocacy, community, and business resources. Keep listening to learn more about the Graphic Artists Guild and visit our website at www.graphicartistsguild.org.
If you're in business, you want to get something for as little as possible. And if you can figure out a way to get it for free, then sure, you're going to try to get it for free. That is how people do business. So when you advocate for yourself, what you're doing is you agreed to be part of this game. You agreed to be part of this system where everybody is trying to make a buck and get as much as they can for as little as they can, because we're all trying to survive. So don't take it personally, but just make sure you protect yourself.
In this week's advocacy episode of GuildCast, Rebecca Blake, Advocacy Liaison for the Graphic Artists Guild, talks with Bill Morse about why advocacy is so important for graphic artists.
Rebecca, as a creative person, I'm an illustrator designer. Bill here, he's an illustrator cartoonist. Why should we care about advocacy, the advocacy that the Guild does? Why should we care, like, what's going on behind the curtains? Why can't we just go ahead and just do our work? I just want to draw.
So I've put a lot of thought into this because, first of all, I'm a graphic artist too. I'm a designer. And I got involved with the Guild because I needed a job, and then I stayed involved with the Guild because I needed to know how to do my job, and then I got involved with being active with the Guild, and that kind of sucked me into advocacy. And then because the Guild is involved with the International Council of Design, ICOD, I've gotten to work on a professional code of conduct. And the thing that's been brought home to me over and over and over again is the reason why I am so passionate about advocacy is, first of all, self-interest, because I want to earn a living and I want to have respect and I want to get paid for what I do. But I've realized that in order to protect my self-interests, I have to care about the community of graphic artists in general. I've got to care about my peers. And the reason why caring about my peers is so important is, first of all, it's because it gives us a louder voice when we're trying to change, copyright laws that means we can register our works more easily, or if we want to weigh in on labor bills that affect how we work as small business owners, or if we want to ask Congress to please actually make sure some of that COVID relief is directed towards us. We need a louder voice. We need to be able to drown out the people with much, much, much louder voices and a lot more power than us. But the second reason why is because when we advocate for our industry, we raise the profile of our industry. We're regarded by outsiders more as professionals and as people who should be valued and people who can be trusted. So when you advocate for yourself, you very often start from a very tiny area of personal self-interest. I got involved with the Guild because I needed a job. But the more you start doing it, the more you realize it balloons to much larger and larger and larger issues. And it all does eventually come back to you and how you thrive as an individual artist. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And, I was thinking about how I do care about where the industry is going. And I want to make sure that even beyond me, that Fiverr doesn't win. Places like Fiverr and that undercut the kind of work that we all do, and it also makes people think that our value is much, much lower than we're showing on our invoices.
Yeah.
Definitely. One thing that always frustrates me is that people don't seem to believe I'm doing this to make a living, and seem to say, even friends who know better keep saying, "You get paid for this?" And I say, "I should hope so." And getting back to Fiverr, I remember not just Fiverr, but similar groups. One professional freelancer group I attended, and because of this conversation, I stopped attending them, was one where the subject of a Fiverr-like company where you bid on contract work came up, and people were telling how they were getting into it, and I'm saying, this is barely minimum wage, and and this guy with a straight face said, "Look, you got to lowball it, otherwise you'll lose to somebody from a third world country," and so that one was just, it was all I could do to stop. It's almost to my best. One of those cases of where it's a good thing that I overcompensate for being slow on the uptake and didn't say anything angry.
That you were thinking.
And on the same note, it reminds me of this awful Fiverr commercial that was going on, that was showing on YouTube for a while, where they're talking about finding the best artists, and they're keep showing this example of a graphic artist who's this complete stoner who they can't rely on, and why don't you use Fiverr? And I want to reach into the computer screen and strangle whoever's doing that.
It's painful.
Yeah.
What we have to remember is that what we have to convey also is that we're offering more than just the work that we do. It's also communication, it's professionalism, there's so much more. And we can't compete with those people who are lowballing us money-wise, but we can compete with the quality of work and the quality of the relationships that you're building with your client.
Yeah,
you're absolutely correct. I think, Bill, you put your finger on something with that example. One of the things we do when we advocate for ourselves as graphic artists, as illustrators, as designers, as business owners, is we tell our own story. And the problem with the example you gave is that too often outsiders tell our story. And that's how these stereotypes come out about the flaky artist, or, the starving artist in the garret who's willing to just do whatever for a quick buck, or the artist that you can't trust, or the artist who just basically makes pretty things, when all of us know that making pretty things is not what we do. That is a side effect of what we do. So when we advocate for ourselves, we tell our stories. And that is so important for us to be taken seriously as professionals. We can't leave it for other people to tell our stories.
Oh, definitely. And I frequently find that the more advocacy, hopefully sooner or later, as almost on the international scale, because I always have a very mixed feelings about a lot of those international bids, because at one level, I probably come off like the entitled white boy saying they took our jobs, but at the same time, I don't like these, as much as I don't like being underbid, I don't want those guys to be screwed over either.
Well, that's part of the power of community. When you advocate for yourself and you find your tribe and you build your community, our community doesn't end at our borders. Our community truly is global. And Fiverr would love to pit designers from Indonesia against designers from the United States and keep driving down the price lower and lower and lower. But when we're talking on a global level, when we're talking to our colleagues overseas, the first thing you understand is there are professional designers in Indonesia who understand completely that this is a zero-sum game. That these technology platforms that enable crowdsourcing and pit designers and illustrators against each other for a lower and lower wage, nobody wins except the technology platform.
So then why do they participate?
People will participate in communities where the small sum that they can get from Fiverr constitutes a really nice income.
Right.
But that's limited, because as you raise the standard of living, as you raise income levels, you also raise expenses. So you find communities in other countries or even within the United States where perhaps they could have earned a living on these wages, but eventually they're going to be priced out, and eventually they're going to be undercut by yet another group that can survive on these pittance wages. It's a zero-sum game because it constantly finds the market lower and lower.
That's a great example of advocating for the industry rather than yourself, because they can make the $5 on their designs and elevate themselves to the point where they have enough quality work that they can start getting higher paid jobs. But that's not looking out for everyone else. And that's part of why the Guild, it's so important what all the advocacy work that the Guild does, because it is on behalf of us all.
Yes, exactly.
So Rebecca, what drew you to advocacy at the Guild?
Actually, it was defined for me really clearly around the time, I think, I forget what issue was rising up. I think it could have been around the time that some of the publishers were pushing these contracts with this language saying, we declare we get universal rights and media yet to be discovered to your copyrights, and you have to sign this contract or else. Oh, and we get these rights in perpetuity. And it was explained to me through the lovely people at the Graphic Artists Guild. So I was attending some talk on this or another about how this kind of contract language isn't even enforceable. But what this contract language does is it deters people who sign these contracts from even pursuing their copyrights, from even understanding that they have copyrights, that you can't give away your copyrights in perpetuity because, you can actually have the copyrights revert back to you legally. We're not going to go into that because that's a longer conversation. But I think what struck me was the inherent unfairness of these contracts, and how it felt that the publishers were leveraging the extreme competition that exists between graphic artists to put themselves in a really unfair advantage. And I realized that I want to be involved in advocacy work because I hate being bullied, and I don't like bullies. And that is the major reason why that ire at somebody who, for whatever reason, because they have more financial means, because they have a better position in the power structure of relationship, the idea that person can somehow make it harder and harder and harder for me to earn a living is just not acceptable. Not when the work I do is in fact valued. So that's the reason why I stay involved. And I didn't want to be one of those people who just sits around and complains, because it's a tough career. Being a designer, being an illustrator is a tough career. And you're constantly dealing with people, clients or people who go through your portfolio and grab stuff and want to stick it on a t-shirt or whomever. You're constantly coming up against people who want to take advantage of you. That's just part of being a designer or an illustrator. But I didn't want to sit around and just gripe about it, because that doesn't do anything. And I'd rather work my heart out on something and get 20 or 30 or 40 or 50% of what I need back than sit around and complain and just see things get worse and worse and worse. And so that's basically why I got drawn to Guild advocacy.
Bill, what interests you about advocacy over at the Guild?
Well, it's sort of, I'm not sure. I thought it pretty much, I joined the Guild mainly because I assumed as a professional you should be part of a trade group. Mm-hmm. And obviously just the basics of sort of, at the very least, at a cynical level, long-term insurance.
Sure.
I don't know if I
were you interested. At what point did you become interested in the advocacy part of the Guild?
Probably when I was started to be doing some of the marketing for one of our Case Act campaigns, where I needed to, in order to do these, both the advertising comics the advertising logos I did for the campaign, as well as a handful of political cartoons I did for the campaign. I started needing to know what I was talking about beyond just writing Rebecca's copy onto my pictures.
Right, and folks, you should check out the cartoons that Bill made for just specifically for the Guild to get the word out about the Case Act. They're really wonderful, and Bill, I think you really hit the nail on the head with those cartoons.
GuildCast is a weekly podcast series based on the 3 pillars of the Graphic Artists Guild: advocacy, community, and business resources. Keep listening to learn more about the Graphic Artists Guild and visit our website at www.graphicartistsguild.org.
That is such a great example of telling our own stories, because we were trying to get these members of Congress to understand why individual creators, illustrators and photographers and writers and songwriters, why these folks needed to have a copyright small claims board. And we were up against some pretty powerful forces. The tech sector tried very hard to kill that bill, and they were putting out all these stories about how, grandmothers were going to be fined $15,000 for posting on Facebook and all sorts of stuff. So what Bill's cartoons did is, in a really humorous, memorable way, they kind of distilled the unfairness of our copyright system. There's one cartoon of a guy beaten up and lying on a sidewalk, and somebody walking away with, their billfolds, counting the money they just mugged off of this guy. And one cop says to the other, well, for $500, it's really not worth arresting the guy, which is exactly how a designer or illustrator feels when a copyright infringer steals their work. And they can't even take the infringer to court because the amount of award they would get would be so low. There's no point in hiring a lawyer.
Which is where the Case Act came into play.
And that's where the Case Act came in. But that cartoon, those cartoons are such a great example of how we tell our stories, because that told the story of what the hell we're feeling, what the hell we're going through when we can't take copyright infringers to court. So that's a great example of advocacy right there.
Yeah, and then one thing I find as a necessary of just even after that great victory, the need to still continue with the education. On the other example, once the Case Act passed, I was riding high and was looking for some articles to share on my other art groups, and all I could find were these libertarian articles about how the rights of artists were being gouged. Yes, that is a way that our story was taken away from us and subverted. There was a campaign trying to convince artists that the Case Act would hurt them when it wouldn't. I actually have a question, which is, Ed, what got you interested in advocacy work? I know you've actually testified before Congress, which is really cool.
I have, and that was really scary, but I was never a member. I've been a member of the Guild for like 25 years, something ridiculous like that. And advocacy was never an interest of mine. I was in it for the community. I was in it for, and then eventually I was in it after I'd had enough experience. I was in it to be there to help out struggling artists or people trying to figure out how to make it as a freelancer or even as a creative. So it was my way of giving back. I really felt like it was important to do that. And then slowly, I became friends with the previous advocacy chair of the Guild, who really opened my eyes to a bunch of things here and there, but it was so overwhelming. I got to say, anyone who wants to dive into advocacy, some of it can feel overwhelming, and it takes time to just kind of soak it in and get to understand it. And there was a hearing on the First Sale Act, which was, this is back in June 2014. And
that was the right of first sale.
The right of first, thank you. The right of first sale. I'm not going to try to explain it right now, but you guys can look it up. Anyway, it's on the Guild's website. You can actually read the article that I wrote about the experience. And I was sitting in a room it was in New York, in front of the
House Judiciary, yeah,
committee, doing this hearing about revamping the U.S. copyright law, and it was amazing to hear. There were a whole bunch of other people from different industries, all there to testify, and I believe right next to me was a gentleman who was trying to, he had the opposing view that I had, that he wanted to be able to resell digital rights to things. That's a very brief explanation. And it was interesting just to hear everyone's side of it. Everyone has a different position on it. And we need to figure out, the courts need to, or the House Judiciary needed to figure out where was the right place to be on it.
Yeah.
And I got to say that it was overwhelming. I was working hard to understand the ins and outs. And since then, I've been able to digest what that experience was really about and start to wrap my head around more of the advocacy that the Guild deals with. And I've come to realize that it's, as someone who's been in this industry or these industries for a long time, it's starting to become a little bit of my responsibility to make sure, exactly what Rebecca said at the beginning, make sure that we're taking care of the future of our industries, of not only ourselves. I'm going to be done with these industries in 30 years, but there are plenty of people who are just up and coming or not even out there yet, and they need us to hold the gates open for them.
But I think one of the really crucial things to understand is that, the advocacy really starts with how one, as a graphic artist, as a designer, an illustrator, just begins to engage with clients and with prospective clients and with the world in general. So, it's fabulous that you testified before Congress, and it's fabulous that Bill was able to contribute illustrations and cartoons to support this big campaign. But the thing that I really want people who are starting out to understand is that advocacy comes down to talking to a client and saying, this is why I'm licensing the copyrights, instead of, yes, I'm just going to hand them to you without discussing them, or this is why I deserve to get paid this much, or this is why you need to abide by the contract terms we agreed to. You have to pay me it on time and everything else. And by the way, that also implies there's the part of advocacy is also recognizing you have your own responsibility to live up to your part in the bargain with any contract.
So I'm glad you mentioned licensing, because it's through understanding how my rights are and through how we're advocating on behalf of other artists and the Case Act. And it's through all of that I started to recognize licensing as a better way to term what I'm doing with my illustrations. When someone buys an illustration from me, rather than saying that I'm selling them the illustration, I'm now licensing the illustration to them so that they understand. So that, first of all, I have a clear paper trail that they only have the rights to use it this way, and I retain the rest of the rights, and I am able to earn more from that artwork because the wording that I use all grew out of listening to the advocacy of the Guild and listening and just, showing up to webinars and listening to how other people present and just formulating a way that this all works for me.
Yeah.
And like your wording is wonderful, but I need it in the words that I would say. And you giving us the words helps us kind of digest it and then spew it out, I guess.
One of the things that I was, I'm able to speak to students on a very regular basis, fairly regular basis. And one of the things I've realized that I've started to tell them to help empower them is to say, you're going to create work of great value and people are going to try to undervalue it and you can't take it personally. And what I was trying to say is, the work that graphic artists creates is such an economic engine. I mean, it's what makes people want to go onto social media platforms. It explains text. It, imposes coherence onto messaging. It's just so valuable. But if you're in business, you want to get something for as little as possible. And if you can figure out a way to get it for free, then sure, you're going to try to get it for free. That is how people do business. So when you advocate for yourself, what you're doing is you agreed to be part of this game. You agreed to be part of this system where everybody is trying to make a buck and get as much as they can for as little as they can because we're all trying to survive. So don't take it personally, but just make sure you protect yourself. Because sure, if a client will listen to you and if they understand that this is part of doing business, is licensing your works, paying a fair wage, they'll come around and they'll do it. But you have to take the first step.
So what's really interesting here is that it's not just that you're saying is that it's not just that the Guild is the only way to advocate for the industry or for yourself. You actually there are many routes to self-advocate. And Rebecca, I have a PowerPoint in front of me that you put together, and there are some really great points that you talk about in this PowerPoint. And I'd love to go through some of them, some of the ideas that anyone listening to this podcast, here are some things that you can do just to advocate for yourself to improve your conditions with your clients and how your contracts are and what to do when there's an issue with your clients. And so I'm looking at page 12 of it, if you want to pull that up.
Sure.
The first one, and I'll let you talk about it a bunch while you're looking it up. The first one is to contact copyright infringers.
Yes.
You get in touch with them. Can you suggest what do you do at that point once you've contacted them?
Well,
The thing our colleague, Rebecca, the thing our colleague Mark Monlux always do is sends them an invoice.
Yes.
I love that. I love that solution. Yeah. Thank you for using my work. You shouldn't have, but here's my invoice for having used my work.
Yes, exactly. So, now we got to be clear at the outset that the unfair part of this is nobody in the world should have to spend ages trying to track down people who are stealing from them. So in essence, that is what we are asking people to do. But again, this is what happens. People do steal our work. And step number one is find the copyright infringer. And when you find the copyright infringer, find out how you can contact them. So you can do exactly what Bill said, is you send them an invoice or an email. You say to them, hi, you may not have realized it, but this work is in fact copyrighted to me. And you need to either take it down if you as the graphic artist want it removed, or you need to pay me a fee for using it. Now, oddly enough, there are a significant number of copyright infringers who will in fact respond and say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize this, can we negotiate or let me immediately take it down? The internet has made it so easy for people to steal things that a lot of people, I think, don't even realize it.
Right.
There is also a really significant number, and unfortunately it's over half of copyright infringers, who actually will ignore you. They just won't bother to respond. That's the thing that's really heartbreaking about it. However, we did get the Case Act passed, and the Case Act sets up a copyright small claims tribunal. And we think that what's happened is the people who know damn well they're infringing your copyrights are kind of banking on the fact that you don't have the wherewithal to pursue them. So that's the reason why they're ignoring you. Now that creators will have a means to pursue copyright infringers, we actually expect that that copyright infringers are all of a sudden going to have a powerful incentive to get back in touch with you when you contact them and say, you stole my work. So the really big thing we hope the Case Act does, the Copyright Small Claims Tribunal does, is we hope it acts as a deterrent to these copyright infringers. Yeah. But I always think it's a good idea, start that conversation and see where it goes.
And the next one is negotiate on unfair contract terms or turn down the work.
Yes, a lot of people don't realize that you don't have to accept a contract with unfair terms. You can negotiate on it. And in fact, most businesses negotiate on contracts. So if you come across a contract, if somebody tries to convince you to sign a contract that has really unfair terms, start a negotiation on it. What you can do is you can cross out that term and put your initials by that cross out and then sign the contract and return it to them. Chances are that the person's going to get back in touch with you and say, why did you do that? But that's the point where you can then start negotiating on those contract terms.
Coming up on this episode of GuildCast.
Putting a work up in your portfolio is not considered published because a portfolio is considered a display, and an online display is different from being published. And the equivalent to think of is putting a painting up in an art gallery. If you put a painting up in an art gallery, that painting isn't published, it's being displayed. Once you take that painting and put it on the cover of a magazine, it's then published. Well, it's the same thing.
Join the Graphic Artists Guild to listen to the full version of this episode at www.graphicartistsguild.org. Thanks for listening to GuildCast. Coming up in next week's episode.
Anyway, I drew myself as a chicken, and about all the kind of adjustments I had to go through kind of moving from like this one big city to another place I had no friends or family with. And so that really helped me. And that really kind of got me to really loving the form. And also when I moved to Ann Arbor, I was trying to look for people that were kind of illustrators. Like I've always been in children's books. So I was trying to look for children's book illustrators and writers there. But in that community, there was a lot more comic artists. So I started hanging out with them. And then that kind of fueled more about my love of comics. So, and now I feel like the industry has really boomed, especially in kids comics. So it's kind of like a perfect segue for me to do kind of the picture books, but then also be involved with like comics and cartoons and graphic novels.
Totally. And hanging out with other comic people is so much fun. The conversations that you can have.
GuildCast is a weekly podcast series based on the 3 pillars of the Graphic Artists Guild: advocacy, community, and business resources. Keep listening to learn more about the Graphic Artists Guild and visit our website at www.graphicartistsguild.org.